I try to imagine a fellow smarter than myself, and then I try to think, what would he do?
Charge up your axons, ready your receptors, and shift your lobes into upper beta phase. You are listening to Smart Drug Smarts, the podcast dedicated to helping you optimize your brain with the latest breakthroughs in neuroscience, nootropics, and psychopharmacology.
Hello and welcome to Smart Drug Smarts. I'm your host, Jesse Lawler, excited to bring you episode number 107. In this podcast, closing in on the end of 2015 and striving as always to bring you the latest and greatest tips, tricks, how-tos, and in this case even songs for the ongoing betterment of your own brain. We're going to be talking with a couple of guys today who recently launched a website which combines artificial intelligence, music production, and cognitive enhancement. And if that sounds like a lot of things to wedge into one website, it is. But these guys are the founders of a site called Brain.fm, and we're going to be speaking with them about Brainwave audio entrainment, the particulars of the technology behind what they're doing, and how sound waves can affect your brainwaves. If you hang around until the very end of the episode, I'm going to tell you about a seasonal study by scientists who, I kid you not, are looking scientifically for the signature of the Christmas spirit within human brains. It sounds a little bit ridiculous. It is a little bit ridiculous, but if you like a little science with your wistful Christmas merriment, then hang around for the ruthless listener retention gimmick, and we have got you covered. But now, as usual, let's kick things off with This Week in Neuroscience.
Smart Drug Smarts, This Week in Neuroscience.
So, since we're going to be talking about music in this episode, I figured it would be appropriate to find a musically inclined study for This Week in Neuroscience. And it turns out there was actually a really big one recently with some quite interesting findings. So there's a lot of different ways that people's personalities are measured, but one of the main ones is a system that breaks down personality into 5 primary components. This goes by the acronym OCEAN. Those components are openness, conscientiousness, extroversion, agreeableness, and neuroticism. So each person could have high or low values or somewhere in the middle on each of those 5 indexes. So psychologists at the University of Cambridge and Goldsmiths University teamed up with the BBC to recruit over 7,000 different volunteers to do the largest ever study on personality and musical expertise. Participants were tested on musical abilities including melodic memory and rhythm perception. Now, not surprisingly, the primary factor feeding into whether a person is musically talented or not has to do with how much practice they've put into developing their skills with music. That's not going to be a surprise to everybody. You want to learn the piano, you got to play a lot of scales, things like that. But what did come out of this that was really interesting was that the next best predictor of musical ability was the personality trait openness. People who scored high on openness within their personality, these people, by the way, are defined as being open to new ways of thinking, as opposed to those who are more set in their ways and prefer routine, familiar settings. But people who score highly in openness had very significantly higher musical ability. Says Dr. Jason Renfro, a senior author on the study, psychologists had originally focused on the links between personality and musical preferences, but it's turning out that personality has a far more pervasive role in our everyday musical experiences, including our musical ability. So one of the takeaways from this is there are probably a lot of people out there who rank highly in openness, but have never had formal musical training and are kind of like untapped musicians that might not even know that they've got this nascent ability hiding in there. One other finding, surprising no one, was that researchers found that extroversion was strongly correlated with self-reported singing ability, which is basically a scientific way of saying that shy people don't like to sing karaoke very much. But if you're curious how you stack up, if you might have hidden musical abilities that you never suspected, you can take this test. It is online at www.themusicquiz.org, and we'll put a link to that on the Smart Drug Smarts site as well.
Smart Drug Smarts, we get you thinking.
So I would like to throw out a huge holiday thank you to everybody all year who, well, I mean, basically anybody that's reached out at any point during the year, or even previous years. It's very much appreciated. It's awesome. It's the fuel in our tank, the glucose in our veins, and the action potential charging up to fire across the synaptic cleft. It is all of those things, but a very special hat tip to those fine folks who have left us positive reviews on iTunes, which probably has just about the biggest, bang for the buck that anything out there does. If you want to spend 5 minutes towards doing something significant to help out a podcast you like, there's a lot worse ways that you can spend that 5 minutes than leaving a positive review on iTunes. Not entirely coincidentally, we picked up 2 5-star reviews on iTunes this week. One from ZHard569 who said, "I needed something to entertain me while teaching me. This podcast is informative and keeps me coming back for more." And Doc BML said, "I'm a psychology student attending a doctoral program for neuropsychology within the Chicagoland area. I've found your podcast to be informational, accurate, and entertaining." He even mentions a study that he and his supervising professor are working on that might make for a good future episode. So if you're listening, Doc BML, yes, definitely reach out. And that goes for the rest of you too. Jesse@smartdrugsmarts.com is my highly public email address. Like everyone, I've got a love-hate relationship with my inbox, but when it comes to you guys, it's mostly love. Speaking of email, if you would like to get your very own email from me, it's not as hard as you might think. In fact, you might not even think it's hard, but I send out a newsletter about once a week that you can quite easily sign up for at the Smart Drug Smarts website. We've got a landing page specifically for it at smartdrugsmarts.com/newsletter. That'll get you our weekly brain breakfast email, chock full of good stuff like this week. Well, this is actually going to be on the website also. But we've put together a little last-minute holiday gift list if you want to do some shopping specifically with the brains of your giftees in mind. 4 or 5 different ideas of things that you could give for your mom, your boyfriend, your girlfriend, your whomever, to let them know, hey, I'm not just thinking of you, I'm thinking about your brain. And these are all pretty small things. I think they're like $30 tops. Nothing to break the bank on this list. We kept it modest. And that is actually at smartdrugsmarts.com/2015-stalking. That's stalking like stocking stuffers, not stalking like I was stalking my next victim. For those of you looking to be just a little bit more lavish in your holiday gift giving, somewhat over the $30-ish threshold, but not that high, we've got our couple of stacks, Nexus and Mitogen, over at axonlabs.io. You've heard me talk about them before. And if you haven't tried them, well, if you order now, you'll get a holiday deal, plus you'll be able to kick off the new year in some cognitively enhanced style. I'm happy to report that I've got 2 pills of Nexus in my system, even as I speak, which is actually a pretty common occurrence. But if you want to see what I like putting in my brain, then head on over to axonlabs.io.
Smart Drug Smarts.
Okay, so if you're a Smart Drug Smarts listener, you've probably heard the introduction to this podcast when the announcer guy says, shift your lobes into upper beta phase. And maybe you thought, what is upper beta phase? Or maybe you already know that even though your brain is made of 80 to 100 billion neurons, and each of them is kind of a semi-independent system in its own right, doing its own thing, it's also true that there are rhythms that affect our entire brain. When you hear about reading brainwaves, you're not hearing about reading individual neurons' activity, but sort of the overall fluctuations of the entire brain as a whole. And through something called brainwave entrainment, which they've known about for a long, long time, it's possible to supply a frequency in the outside world. This could be done visually, this could be done auditorily, and eventually the brain itself starts sort of syncing to that outside rhythm. So you can kind of nudge your brain's overall frequency of oscillation in one direction or another. So nudge it deeper into sleep or make it more alert. It's not like this is an instant or an all-powerful thing where you're going to find somebody that's all charged up, you play a certain tone and they instantly fall asleep, but it does seem to do something. Anyway, so about a month ago, a friend of mine said, hey Jesse, you should check out this site. It's a website, it's called brain.fm. I've been using it for a while, I really like it. It's altering my brainwaves, it's putting me into this period of deep focus. They've got musicians, they've got neuroscientists, check them out. And so I got in touch and we're going to be talking today with the 2 founders of brain.fm, Junaid Kalmadi and Adam Hewitt. Junaid is sort of the business guy, the CEO, and Adam is the musician and technician behind their technologies. Their site is live, they've been up and running for a while now, and we're going to be talking about how their technology works, what they've built, what they're hoping to do next, and how they're using audio as a way of tweaking people's cognitive processes. So with no further ado, here we go with Junaid Kalmadi and Adam Hewitt.
So Brain FM, we make AI-generated music to train your brainwaves for 3 goals. The first goal is deeper focus. The second one is relaxation. And the third one is sleep. So the way it works, it's a consumer application. You come on to Brain FM and you listen to a session. There's no sign up, anything, just get started. And you try it out. You use it while you're doing an activity. So the most common use case right now for us is focus. So if you're coding, if you're writing, if you're studying, listen to the intense focus session or relaxed focus session. Those are 2 options within it. And it takes minutes to feel the difference. So in the past, it used to take months and weeks. And we can sort of get into what the innovation that came about that enabled it in a matter of minutes. But it's designed for an immediate impact as well as a long-term impact. So it's sort of like your companion, like coffee would be to when you're working.
So let's hear some of the science behind it. I would love to hear sort of the evolution of the science of affecting brain waves with sound waves.
So, I've been doing this for 13 years, and my whole life is about affecting brainwaves with music. And there's a number of ways to do it. The one most people know about is called brainwave entrainment. And this involves using rhythms. And the brain is very rhythmic. It kind of communicates with various parts of itself using rhythm or cycles, electricity waves, I guess you could call it. And you can affect those by kind of introducing a rhythmic stimuli near the frequency range of the brainwaves. So if you wanted to relax somebody, then you would introduce 10 hertz or something like that, which is near alpha. That would cause them to eventually kind of feel relaxed. And there's a number of theories on why this works. Still kind of all debating those. I have my own, but nobody's kind of sure what's right. But the cool thing is that, you can go on an EEG and say it's flat, say the baseline is flat, and say we introduce a 10 hertz stimulus, we see 10 hertz rise. There's a peak there. That does affect mental state, dramatically. And so we've done a lot of experimentation over these years and found protocols that work very, very well for focus, for relaxation, and just recently for sleep, which is something that I've really been interested in. One of the reasons I got into this in the first place. I have severe insomnia, and only just recently have I been able to finally cure that.
Tell me about the 3D technology, how you're sort of placing these sounds in three-dimensional space.
Well, MIT developed this technology that they call HRTF, head-related transfer function. Basically, what they did, as far as I understand it, is they took two microphones, placed them on a dummy's head as if they're the ears of the dummy, and then played a bunch of sounds around the head and measured, what's the difference in these sounds between the two ears. And then they created kind of a database of filters that you can apply to sound to make it seem like, okay, it's in front of you, or it's to the side, or above you, or behind you. For the longest time, I couldn't use this because we just didn't have either the processing power or maybe I just wasn't smart enough, the know-how to move these sounds around without creating kind of auditory clicks or problems. And plus, it wasn't really consistent. So I had to actually kind of modify these filters in many cases to get the precise result that I wanted to. So finally, in about, I think, early 2014, we perfected it enough, and it's still being perfected today. It'll just keep getting better and better. Basically, I can place a sound anywhere in 3D space with a user just having stereo headphones, regular $7 earbuds. That's fine. It'll work. Actually, earbuds ironically work a lot better than headphones because they're closer to the ear canal. And I can have thousands of sounds and moving all around you. I had a friend of mine go out and record some binaural recordings of nature, and there was a little bee, and I didn't even detect it, but it started really disturbing our users.
Yeah, if you're trying to drift off into sleep and then you think you're going to get stung by a bee, that's not going to work so well.
Yeah, exactly. So now I filter all insects out of everything that I can. That's sometimes a pretty laborious process. But for sleep, we can emulate how it would sound if you are rocking in a hammock or in a cradle. And since the ear actually has a lot to do with balance, this really, really enhances the sleep onset.
What about binaural beats? Is that a related technology? Is it something totally different?
That's a great question. In terms of contextualizing it, it's almost saying binaural beats is sort of 1970s technology, and we are sort of innovating on the very nature of sound itself. So it's almost like comparing pre-dial-up internet to fiber optic internet. It's just better technology with better results, in short. But there's a lot of interesting details around why binaural beats has a lot of popularity associated with it. But in terms of its therapeutic impacts on the brain, Gerald Oster, one of the first researchers who coined the term binaural beats, denied in the first paper for binaural beats that it has any therapeutic value, along with Northwestern, has done a ton of testing because they have a sound lab that actually uses EEGs to study this stuff, and they could virtually record nothing on it. So there's a lot of perception with binaural beats out there. There's a lot of confusion on what actually is going on, but that's sort of like an overview.
So what is the real mechanism of action here by which the music that you're playing is affecting the brain waves of the listener, the recipient? And then a related question, on your website it says that this works best if you're listening with stereo headphones. So you're getting slightly different stuff in the left and right ear. How does that play in?
I'll take the first question, and Adam, you'll be best for the second one. So the premise is that what are brainwaves? Brainwaves are electrical discharges that are given off by your brain constantly in your lives, and you can measure this on an EEG. There's brainwave states all the time going on. So say, for example, if you're studying, if you're reading, if you're talking to a friend, if you're drunk, if you're climbing a mountain, no matter what, there's brainwave states associated with it. And the discovery is you can intervene and create the ideal brainwave state or the ideal mental state by a stimulus. And the stimulus that we're using is sound. So you use sound to change the brainwaves, and then the brainwaves changes the mental state to whatever desired effect. So for us, it's focus, relaxation, sleep. There's also other areas that we'll be branching into for lifting, for cardio, for athletic performance. There's different areas. So the basic thing is use a stimulus like sound, which will train the brainwaves, and the brainwaves will induce a mental state.
So the different brain frequencies and then the sort of the physical and mental states that people find themselves in associated with that, is that pretty consistent from one person to the next, or can there be some individual variation there?
Actually, it can vary quite a bit. And we, for years, did a lot of research on that. I invented something, what I call biooptimization, where we would have various biofeedback devices, including Emotive and Neuroscience and GSR, HRV, all that stuff. And it would measure it and kind of vary the frequency a little bit every time you played a session. What we really ended up kind of deciding is there's certain kind of markers you can ask people, questions about stress and their current mood, and you can take their kind of ratings. And we developed a personalization system over 2 years and implemented it into Brain FM. So it starts out with you kind of answering a bunch of questions. And then we analyze your ratings. And from that, we can actually get a lot of information because we have a huge data set over 13 years. And the more people that we get on, the better and better it gets at adapting to you almost immediately.
Every brain is unique. We take that thesis and we sort of build that unique psych profile when you first come into Brain FM after your first session. And then we examine that progress every other week. And Adam brilliantly developed our core algorithm in the back end that basically analyzes the rating for each session. So after each session, you get to rate it too. Like, was it amazing? Did it work? Or were you not sure? So we get like individual feedback on each and every session across over 30,000 current users right now. So all this data that we're gathering is basically to determine what's the best session for you at any given time.
So when I've done it, I've heard, I guess what I would describe as like space music. Now, is there any way of varying that and getting that so like a user could upload their own music and still have it be algorithmically altered somehow by your AI system to produce these effects in the brain that you're going for?
Yeah, for sure. Well, I think we need to figure out how to make this button that people seem to miss. And I mean, you're not the only one. It's the skip button. And simply clicking that, you'll get another genre, and it will remember that you skipped that last one, and so it'll have a different weight on that genre in the future. So if you end up liking an Irish theme, then it'll give you that more and more. But yeah, we do need to work on that interface part of it. But you can also go to Explore. There's an Explore section, and then you can kind of just pick whatever genre you want.
Luckily, I am a fan of space music, so that has not bothered me yet.
It's pretty random at first, if you can imagine, like the first play, like we don't know much about you. We've kind of batted around ideas of asking them what's some of your favorite bands or something like that, but it's kind of hard to gauge what people are going to like the very first time. But, we actively encourage people to skip around because it's not going to hurt your progress. It's not going to hurt anything.
When you're playing Brain FM, you have the option to skip a session in case you don't like it. We have in the pipeline that we're toying around with sort of like a musical preferences option. So say, for example, someone who hates classical or loves ethnic or the other way around, we can know that up front, because if you don't like ethnic music and you're trying to relax, that's not going to help you.
So for somebody that's on their website, let's say they're listening to a focus session, they click, hey, this absolutely blew my mind. They give that session 5 out of 5 stars. What effects are they seeing? What is the actual perceptual end result for that person? With maybe like a baseline 1.0 being a Starbucks medium coffee?
The most common effect is that you forget that you're even playing Brain FM. You're zoned into what you're writing, right? And that's the goal. Like sort of time dilates, sort of like a flow state begins to emerge, and you've stopped procrastinating. You're just doing the work, and you're so deep in it, you really begin to have a reliable tool. So what happens over time, people sort of begin their day with Brain FM because it's like the perfect thing to just sort of start your day and get it going, and it's reliable and it's very consistent in its effects. So you do experience that deep focus, time dilation, kind of like a flow state emerging.
Some people feel a tingling sensation.
Mm-hmm. Especially in coffee shops. It's been a huge thing for us because it's so loud, and students, like it's huge because it really uses some of the 3D audio stuff that Adam can get into to really drown out external noise and really hone in at whatever you're focusing on right now.
Are all the musical pieces 30 minutes? I haven't really adjusted the default settings that much, but everything that I've seen has always been a 30-minute session.
Yeah, right now it is. That is a little bit of a placeholder. We're working on time options for every single category for focus, relaxation, and sleep. And 1 hour, 2 hour options. We're toying with maybe a Pomodoro option because that's been a very popular request.
So when I've ran a session, then afterwards you can click on showing me extra details about what you just heard. There's always an alphanumeric string that's, I guess, uniquely identifying the session that I just listened to. Now, is that music being generated on the fly each and every time, or is there kind of a storehouse of music that then is getting tweaked to make it do to my brain what I've requested for that session?
It is generated by a computer. I spent about 5 months and gained about 50 pounds creating an AI that is good enough to create what I think is good music. But yeah, that is all actually generated. Now, generating it in real time is not usually possible because it's very actually CPU intensive to generate these sessions. And we're not talking about like a MIDI session where just beeps and clicks and...
Yeah, it's not like Super Mario Brothers.
Yeah. If it were just that, that'd be fine. But I'm actually introducing samples of instruments, and arranging them with millisecond precision.
Yeah, I guess what I'm wondering about is sort of the size of the song bank. How many times would I have to listen before I would stumble onto a repeat?
We have a number of what I call them themes. There's 117 themes right now. Actually, I think it's 120 something now. But you might come across a song, or if you choose nature sounds, you might come across a nature sound that sounds pretty much the same. And this is because obviously, like, a human has to approve these themes. The AI is not good enough to say, okay, this is good enough, this sounds good enough. But once we have kind of a configuration for the AI to create something, and it's consistent and good enough, then we can have it continually create things over and over and over.
So when we talk about pharmaceuticals or nutraceuticals on different episodes of the show, one of the things that we consistently find is that different people will have strongly different results. There's just a lot of variation. Some people are high responders, low responders to different things. Have you found a lot of variation?
There are some rare people that don't feel an effect or don't get an effect, or I would imagine. I mean, there's no treatment on earth that simply works for everybody. So I don't want to be arrogant enough to assume that mine does. Tylenol doesn't work for me, and apparently works for a lot of people. Generally, it's been actually very, very consistent. The first 11 years that I was doing this was actually very inconsistent. It was very frustrating for me. I'm what it might be called like a deep listener or something like that, where music really, really affects me. I have a very physical reaction to music. So pretty much all the sessions would work for me, and they work great. And it wasn't until we started building the AI, and I think that the 3D stuff has a lot to do with it, because the brain pays attention to motion. It pays attention to where a sound seems like it's coming from. With the focus sessions, we tend to put the sound right in front of you, so it seems like it's coming from your screen, for example. And that kind of draws the attention of the brain. And there's been a lot of research on the fact that if you focus or draw your attention to the beats or the kind of rapid rhythms that we introduce, then it doubles or triples in its effect immediately. For sleep, we can emulate how it would sound if you are rocking in a hammock, and since the ear actually has a lot to do with balance, this really, really enhances the sleep onset.
You said that you've been working in this field for 13 years now. Obviously, there's been a lot of changes in that time. I mean, what have been some of the changes that you've seen?
Well, I'm sure there's been a lot of hardware breakthroughs, but my own personal breakthroughs have been just by continually developing the software and the technology. That, for example, I have a patent on a method of taking any sound file, such as a sound file of a symphony, for example, and I can single out violin and modulate just that violin. And that's something we should tell people, is that whenever you go and you listen to Brain FM, it's not going to sound weird. It sounds like music. It doesn't sound like binaural beats. It doesn't sound like clicks or pulses of tones. It sounds like music. To the untrained ears, they don't even know the difference. And in our studies, we actually have the unique ability to create a sham placebo that is almost exactly like the control or the experiment.
Yeah, that's a question I wanted to ask, is have you done the side-by-side experiment to see what sort of results are coming from the technology behind this music and what's just somebody going to a website where they're listening to music that they expect to have a result?
Well, we did a study on focus, and we had two control conditions, one with no music and one with music that was very, very, very similar to what you get on Brain FM. And then we had the experiment, which is pretty much what you get on Brain FM. And we got very statistically significant results comparing to no music, and statistically significant results comparing to music, and a whole bunch of really interesting EEG correlates.
Have you experienced people building up a tolerance to this? Have you seen like a dose response curve where you push the amplitude of the frequencies in the music too high and it has a negative effect for people, or anything like that?
Well, it has been the case in the past. That's actually something that I dealt with on a day-to-day basis. And it's commonly called habituation, where you listen to the same kind of song over and over and over, and it loses its effect very, very rapidly. And that's one thing that our personalization algorithm on the site does, is it gives you a different session every time so that you never get habituated to it, rather. Sound is incredibly powerful, and it actually has a lot of people researching it and doing very, very interesting things. And I think that can be expanded upon quite a bit.
The one other thing that strikes me that's sort of a dial that you could certainly try to adjust with sound, and something that we always associate with music anyway, is mood. Is that something that you've tried to play with, or that you have any plans to work that into your system as something that you can try to modulate?
We actually developed a very, very unique and I think, very effective protocol and session for it in the early stages of this whole collaboration, this whole experience. The reason we haven't pursued that, mainly because we did put up some experimental kind of And for the early kind of alpha test of this, we had a mood section, and simply nobody listened to it. It was kind of strange. I mean, it wasn't that they listened to it and didn't get an effect. Literally, nobody was listening to this. And it really surprised me as well. I think we could actually do a lot with it. In fact, I know. I mean, this session that Dr. Ruth Olmsted and I created was incredible. And Jeanette used it, I used it, and it raised our mood almost immediately. And that was a long time ago. I have a lot more ideas in that respect. But I guess we have to figure out the messaging, and we have to figure out, how can we get this out there and in a way that people will actually kind of be interested in and use, consistently enough to get a good result. So there is potential there.
We're innovating on sound itself, on a human sensory medium. And sound has been vastly underestimated. Music has been vastly underestimated. And there's a lot of unknown unknowns. We are navigating into uncharted territory of using sound as a tool to impact the brain. And it all can be measured on an EEG. So we have this great feedback loop with experiential stuff. Like we can actually experience it because we're users of this, and we can throw it out to thousands of people to really get a gauge. But we can also study it side by side on an EEG and really see what's going on. Adam and Giovanni are two mad scientists, are Voyagers, except they're not going out of space. They're going into our inner space of our brain, the next frontier.
You need to come up with some new name, not like psychonauts. You do sononeuronauts or something.
It's really an exciting time for brain science, but for sound and brain science, just watch. Don't believe us, just watch.
Smart Drug Smarts.
So thank you so very, very much to Junaid Kalmadi and Adam Hewitt for their time in that conversation and introducing us to brain entrainment with sound, and particularly what they are doing over there at brain.fm. I was talking with them a bit after the call. I could not believe they got their hands on brain.fm as a domain name. That's a great domain name. Definitely go by and check it out. They've got a free trial where you can listen to something like 3.5 hours of music before you come to the decision point where you've actually got to cough up cash. So plenty of time to find out whether you're getting the extra focus or relaxation or sleepiness or whatever it is that you're going for. I'm sure you're going to want to hear my thoughts on this, and did it work? Does this work? Is it worth going by the website? I've got to punt a little bit on this answer because the answer to the second question I think is a definitive yes. It's worth going by the website and seeing if it works for you. I feel like I've got somewhat mitigating circumstances on the type of music interventions that they're doing here because I'm habitually underslept, so pretty much anything other than roaring jackhammers in my ears can put me to sleep. So listening to some music and then I fall asleep, that pretty much proves nothing. And then on the flip side for focus, I've got reams of playlists on my iTunes and links of YouTube music that I've hand-selected for myself specifically because they kind of get me in the zone. I've got a lot of that stuff, which at this point I've sort of habituated some of those playlists as being my hardcore work music. And I think that's kind of makes for a high bar to make it over for any other music that I don't necessarily have that pre-established relationship with. So I listen to Brain FM. I like the music. I like the three-dimensionality of it. I think it sounds cool. I couldn't say that it's really knocking me up a notch in focus or attention beyond what I might otherwise expect. It's not to say that it's not. It's just ultimately I would just give this one the Pepsi challenge. Go there yourself. Check it out. I'd love to hear people's results. If anybody thinks this really, really moves the dial for them, this episode will be smartdrugsmarts.com/107. So check it out. Let us know what you think. Leave a message in the comments or drop me an email at jesse@smartdrugsmarts.com. But now, let's move on to the ruthless listener retention gimmick.
Smart Drug Smarts. Ruthless listener retention gimmick.
So if you live anywhere in the Western world, you're probably aware of this little holiday that we call Christmas. And every year around this time, there's a lot of predictable things that happen that are tangential to the holiday itself. There's tons of toys, there's extended vacations, there's a predictable slew of generally pretty bad family-friendly movies that come out with holiday themes. But one thing that you don't typically see is scientific studies that are sort of trying to cash in on the holiday craze. But this year, there was one. Copenhagen University and a team of researchers there actually put a study together to try to identify, quote-unquote, the Christmas spirit in the brain using fMRI, functional magnetic resonance imaging. Take this with a very, very large grain of salt or a very, very strong shot of alcoholic eggnog or something like that, because I don't think they mean for this to be taken particularly seriously, but they did actually carry it out like a study. They showed people a total of 84 images of scenes, some of which were Christmassy and some of which were not. There were similar scenes, so you might have a Christmas tree in one and just a well-lit but non-ornamented tree in the next, or baby Jesus in a manger in one and a manger conspicuously conspicuously absent of baby Jesus in another, and they would watch how these people's brains reacted when shown these different images. Then afterwards, they gave the study participants a variety of questions to kind of identify how into Christmas they were. Some of the people were Christians, or at least people who celebrated Christmas and who grew up in traditionally Christmas celebrating countries. Other people were not. And so they divided these people's brains up, or divided the brain scans up based on the people's answers to these questionnaires, and then looked at the differences in the fMRI results based on the Christmassy versus non-Christmassy inclined people. What they found was that the Christmassy images for the people with a bent towards Christmas showed increased activation in 5 brain areas: the left primary motor and premotor cortex, the right inferior and superior parietal lobule, the bilateral primary somatosensory cortex, and a partridge in a pear tree. Now, these areas, among other things, have been associated with spirituality, somatic senses, and recognition of facial emotion. So the scientists, probably grinning a bit, said that further research is necessary to understand the Christmas spirit and potentially other holiday circuits in the brain. But my personal guess is that it stands to reason that if you did the same study in a different culture with people with different cultural background and showed them images with holiday iconography that they're used to, you'd probably see some similar things. But those studies haven't been done yet, maybe because nobody has been silly enough to do them, except for these very, very merry folks at Copenhagen University. But if you want to see some scans of the brain lit up like a Christmas tree that was excited in these 5 areas, we'll put the link to that on the website.
Smart Drug Smarts, where we turn information into sound, into bits, into packet data that turns back into bits and sound, and then into neurotransmitters that release funds that release mail-order synthetic chemicals that cross the blood-brain barrier to release augmented performance from your brain.
Okay, that is it for episode number 107. Thank you for hanging around until the very end. If you just finished Hanukkah, happy Hanukkah. If you're coming up on Christmas, Merry Christmas. We will squeeze one more episode out between now and Christmas time. But if you're a little busy around the holidays and you don't get that listened to quite on time, I will not blame you at all. So let this be your official Merry Christmas from the gang here at Smart Drug Smarts. As usual, the show notes for this episode will be online at smartdrugsmarts.com/107, including the links to everything that we talked about here, and including that list of cognitively enhancing gift ideas for 2015 at smartdrugsmarts.com/2015-stocking. I'll be back at you next week, same time, same podcast, and with the same unflagging commitment helping you fine-tune the performance of your own brain. Have a great week, and stay smart.
You've been listening to the Smart Drug Smarts podcast. Visit us online at www.smartdrugsmarts.com and subscribe to our mailing list to keep your neurons buzzing with the latest in brain optimization. Smart Drug Smarts should be listened to for entertainment purposes only, although some guests on the show are medical doctors, most are not, and the host is just some random guy. Nothing you hear on this podcast or read at smartdrugsmarts.com should be considered medical advice. Consult your doctor and use some damn common sense before doing anything you think might have a lasting impact on your brain.